Okay, so chapter 33 is going to cover everything from World War I to the Russian Revolution that you need to know, and then the end of the war, peace treaty, and then what happens afterward. All right, so things that you'll need to know. Y'all should already know the causes of the war, which make up the acronym MAIN, which stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. These are like the overall causes. So to go a little bit more detail into them, with militarism, this is just everybody building up their militaries. You have people building up their navy. There's a naval race between Germany and Britain. Everybody starts industrializing, and so they really want to have a better military than everybody else. With the alliance system, you had rival alliance systems that were obliged to come to each other's defenses, which at this point you had the Allies and then the Central Powers. Imperialism, again, this is all traced back to colonial disputes. Germany doesn't get involved in the scramble for Africa and imperialism until the late 1800s, and by then pretty much everything's gone, so they really can't get a lot of territory. And then with nationalism, you have the French Revolution that inspired nationalism. You had different ethnic groups that felt they had a right to their own sovereign state, and this is called self-determination. Big word, very important. So all of these things are going to lead up to the war, and it's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Serbia by Gavrilo Princip that actually is the spark and the catalyst for the war. Okay, other things to know. World War I is a total war. When it first started, it was greeted with enthusiasm from all sides because they thought the war was going to be brief. You had the Western Front, and I'll get into the technology in a minute. You also had the Eastern Front. But above all, World War I is a total war. You have the war on the home front, where the economy is mobilized for the war effort. Women are serving in the war. You have propaganda to maintain support for the war. People are being conscripted or drafted into the military. And this is also going to be the case when we get to World War II, but this is the first time that it happens. So changes in warfare, like I said, you have all these different fronts. You have fighting in Asia, fighting in the Pacific. You're going to have fighting in the Middle East, like in Gallipoli, but you're going to see changes, like I said, in the way the war's fought. You're using armored tanks, airplanes, submarines. You have poison gas, machine guns, and you have new rules that come into play in World War I. Civilians now become targets of enemy operations. You're having air raids against civilians. Naval blockades are common, and they're preventing people from getting supplies. So again, it's just a totally different kind of war than has been previously fought. Okay, the big thing to take away from this, besides what's going on in the war, is what happened in 1917. Not the U.S. entering, we get to that later, but we have the Russian Revolution. And you have the February Revolution of 1917. You had uprisings against shortages of food, war deaths, and it was just a really bad time. I mean, Russia had been constantly defeated by Japan in war. Your peasants are striking. They'd been killed in the Bloody Sunday Massacre. And Nicholas II was very, very inept. And so the provisional government, led by a group called the Bolsheviks, is going to overthrow him. So with this provisional government that's only in place for a couple of months, they're ruling after Nicholas left and then later after he's killed. But they don't fix Russia's problems. And so, like I said, this is going to lead to a very long-lasting civil war in Russia. Like I said, they don't do anything. They don't do any of the things they said they were going to do. They don't exit the war. They don't give people land. They're not redistributing land, which is kind of what the people wanted. And you get the Soviets, which are forming, which is where the word Soviet comes from in Russia. But it's just councils consisting of workers and peasants, and they had more power ruling local areas than the provisional government did. But the 1917 Russian Revolution is also known as the Communist Revolution because Vladimir Lenin of the Soviet Union, who leads the October Revolution, lots of different months of revolution with Russia. He is going to be very influenced by the ideas of Karl Marx. He envisions a well-organized, disciplined party to lead the revolution. So he's going to take over the Bolsheviks, which means majority. And he's going to want power for the Soviets, which were the local self-government, a withdrawal for the war. And he's going to use the slogan of peace, land, and bread to appeal to the peasants, take power from the provisional government in the name of all Soviets, pull Russia out of the war, and then set up what becomes communist Russia. He creates what's called the New Economic Policy, and basically this is a state-controlled economy because communism really wasn't going to work well, and peasants can buy and sell goods, but the government's still kind of in control of everything, so it's a little bit more open. And then he dies in 1924, and Joseph Man of Steel Stalin takes over. So you can read some more about the Bolsheviks on that one. But also in 1917, the U.S. is going to enter the war due to unrestricted sub-warfare that the Germans started resuming. They sink the Lusitania. The Zimmerman telegram is part of that. So we get involved in the war, and then by 1918, the war is over. Then you get the Paris Peace Talks of 1919. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. We're blaming Germany for the war. So all of this is going on. Other things besides the 14 points and the Treaty of Versailles, like I said, which nobody really liked, and it wasn't very effective. You have the creation of mandates. A mandate is a nation officially administered as a territory on behalf of the League of Nations. Some mandates were later given their independence, but it's basically like a trusteeship. States of like Germany and the Ottomans were divided among like Britain, France, Belgium, and they were either a Class A, which was they were almost ready to be independent. They were Class B, which was all of Germany's African colonies, or they were Class C mandates, which meant they were either Pacific Island or Southwest colonies of Africa. So you can kind of see over here who got what. A lot of the Arabs in these mandates were outraged. They felt ignored and betrayed by the British, who they were allies with during the war, because they had been promised independence and nationalism in exchange for their cooperation, and they did not get it. In Turkey, Mustafa Kemal, who's also called Ataturk, was one of the Turkish leaders during World War I, and he's considered the father of modern-day Turkey. In 1923, he drove out occupying Allied forces and proclaimed a republic in Turkey. He started passing all these progressive reforms, like women's emancipation. We're allowing Western dress, Western laws. So basically, he has put a secular rule in place in Turkey and is replacing Muslim authorities, and a lot of people didn't really like that. Even though he ruled as a virtual dictator, they were a constitutional democracy, and so this is really going to start shaking things up in the Middle East. This is after the Armenian genocide, and so this is going to kind of put Turkey in a place where it's a little bit more progressive prior to World War II.